Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Don't Panic Project. We provide conversations to help empower, inspire, and educate people suffering from stress, anxiety, and depression. Today's guest is Richard Haight. Richard is an instructor of martial meditation and healing arts. He's also an author, and today we're going to talk to him about his two recent books. The first one is titled Inspirience, Meditation Unbound, the Unconditional Path to Spiritual Awakening. And his second book is a really interesting topic, the title of which is The Psychedelic Leap. So welcome, Richard. Welcome to the Don't Panic Project.
Well, thank you for having me, Jim.
All right. So, Richard, before we get into talking about your books, I want to just talk a little bit about your journey. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you grew up and what inspired you to become a martial meditation and healing arts expert.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Southern California, on a farm, actually. And when I was a young child, I had a series of visions, actually sleeping visions, wherein I was asked to find some kind of spiritual teaching or truth and bring it to the world. It's a long story, and I talk about it in detail in some of the books, but in that vision, it was so powerful, and I felt I didn't really even know what it meant, but I felt that the search for spiritual truth was right for me, even though I had no idea what that meant. The message essentially was that something had been lost through the ages, and to refine that and bring it to the world. And don't rely on what anybody else teaches you or what's written in any books. Find it and bring it to the world. And so that was the beginning of the process. And I guess sort of in my bumbling search as a child, I was ultimately drawn to martial arts. That was at about age 12. And I think I just needed some kind of structure and discipline, something that gave me a sense of control in my life, because I felt like I didn't have any. I was very, very fearful, which is one of the reasons I'm very interested in talking with you. I had very difficult time controlling my emotions. There was a big expectation that I had for myself because of this promise that I had made in this vision. And I think that became an inner demon, the inner critic that's constantly judging everything you do.
Right. Well, I mean, it was
to live up to that expectation at age 12,
Yeah, well, it was a pretty serious vision that you had that you were trying to live up to. And again, since this is something called the Don't Panic Project, and we're kind of diving into stress, anxiety, and depression, and I know this is something you've spoken about in the past, so I just want to kind of touch on it. You were suicidal at one point, to the point actually where you had written a note, and if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, about the time I was 16, largely because, there were a lot of elements involved, but largely because of this vision and then my promise to it, which greatly amplified other existing structures and pressures in your life. As I said, there was this inner demon of critical mind, hyper-judgmental mind that was never outwardly directed. It was always internally directed. And so whatever other people did or said or didn't do or didn't say was not viewed in any sort of negative way, but what was going on within was always being judged. The self was constantly being compared to everything else and coming up short. And at some point, there was a transition into trying to be somebody else, right? And that doesn't end up very well for anybody.
Yeah, I think that's the root cause of a lot of people's stress and anxiety. Either, we're trying to be somebody else, which can also mean we're trying to impress other people. And how do we do that? We try to be somebody that we're not.
It's an act. It's all false.
Yeah.
And that goes and that goes nowhere. And when you do that, every time that you do that, there's an inner diminishment that's going on until eventually there's just very little left.
Right. You just get knocked down mentally a couple of rungs every time you go through that.
Every time you go through that. So by the time I was 16, I was at a point where there was just no hope. I could see, I had no strengths that I could see that were worth giving to the world. And I only saw myself as a detriment. Yeah, it was a horrible place to be. The mind was constantly racing. And there was just this constant narrative about, and like this, it was as if somebody was like your boss is right over your shoulder looking down at your work, just waiting for your mistake. But it's you, I mean, at least from that perspective, it was you. Now I don't see it as me anymore, but that's the inner critic,
Right.
And so one day I just didn't want to, I just couldn't live another day. And so I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, I'd say 3 or 4. You can kind of see the afternoon sun rays coming through my bedroom window at the angle of the sun, sort of kind of getting over into the west. And
yeah.
I remember sitting down on the floor in front of my bed, and I'd already written my suicide note. I had my weapon ready. And so this was the last moment. It was all planned out, done. Everything had been prepared for that could be prepared. I had it all sorted out. I researched the most effective way to do it and make sure that things were solid. I didn't want to screw this one up too, screw up everything else.
Yeah.
The last thing you're going to do, you're going to get it right. And not a laughing matter, I guess, but in a way it is kind of funny. Just the mindset that one goes into when one's in that state. It sounds, people from the outside who've never been suicidal, they think it's maybe some sort of insanity. And I guess it could be described that, but actually it's coldly logical, and at least it was in my case. There was a mathematical formula that had gone on in my head.
Right.
That calculated all of the things that justified my existence versus all of the expenditures of my existence. And there wasn't anything that justified, but there were a lot of expenditures, right? There was just no hope. And so it made no sense to just continue suffering endlessly if there's no hope, right?
Right.
And so from that perspective, it seems logical. But that's all that you know. Of course, there was a lot of potential in this human being.
Which has been realized at this point. You're a master in several Japanese martial arts, and you're an accomplished author. I mean, think about how much you've given to this world.
But that 16-year-old doesn't know that, and
absolutely.
Right now, how many 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds are in the same place? Because this happens as a midlife crisis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that's the reason I started the Don't Panic Project, that to have these conversations, to bring awareness to people that have severe depression, so they realize they're not the only ones and there is a way out. And I've had a lot of amazing conversations with people that have been in some really dark places and have come out and seen the light and contributed a lot of amazing things to society. So, thank you for sharing such an intimate story.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking.
I
was very fortunate. I survived that. And the books that I write and the teachings I give are really, they're all about how, there was sort of, for lack of a better term, and the only thing I can describe it, because I cannot make sense out of it in any other way, a spiritual intervention at that time. A voice, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, a voice came through my chest. It rang like a bell. It was not my voice, but some sort of wisdom that came through that I could actually hear. So it was maybe an auditory hallucination. I don't know. But it continued one of my thoughts, which was, and now I can end it all, which was sort of my last thought. And then I gone into the silent space, and then I had not experienced this kind of silence, the depth of just, it was just no future, no past, for a period of time. I don't even know how long, because time gets kind of weird, right? It was unexpected meditation. And then this voice came through and it said, or you could change your life. You could graduate, you could learn, what was it? You could graduate high school early, you could go to college, you could take, it was telling me all these impossible things to me. You could get rid of these friends that you've been drinking and doing drugs with who aren't your friends, and find people that have a purpose in life that you respect, that are moving towards something, and you can move towards something that you respect. Be yourself, right? Be yourself. Do what you want to do. And so ever since then, I've been trying to find a way, I guess, and if I kind of look back on my life, a way to give that elixir to other people, because that voice didn't come through everybody's chest. And so my books,
it's almost like it's almost like this hand came and kind of slapped you into a reality check. Like you're talking about, you were doing drugs and you had some unsavory friends, and they were probably helping you down this path and depression and so forth. And you had this vision that said, hey, you know what? You have a choice. You can go this way, or you can study and move through this.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know why I believed it. I just believed it. I trusted it. And if you're able to do that for people and help pull people out of a place like that and turn their lives around through any type of means or support, man, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so you do that now, and let's move on to one of your more recent books, which is Inspirience, Meditation Unbound, The Unconditional Path to Spiritual Awakening. And I think that's actually a perfect segue, because we're talking about the issues you were having, and how you had this vision to dedicate your life to enlightenment and teaching, so forth. So in my mind, Inspirience is a lot of that.
Yeah, it's a corrective process. It's a corrective process.
So tell us what that means.
So if you look at what I'm doing now, so I've come to this place with that I would describe as sort of the hub or nexus point of awareness, where there's a sort of inner balance that doesn't get sucked into extremes, yet it embraces everything. It's open and embracing of life, while at the same time releasing or surrendering to every moment. So if death happens now, is as it is. In death, there's embracement too. It's sort of this. It's a place that it's highly inspiring when one is in this place. You could call it the zone, maybe. Right. Because when you're in the zone, there's no sense of self. It's this just stuff is happening. And that's the place of being.
So it's flowing. It's a flow state.
It's a flow state that is beyond intellectualization. I mean, you can intellectualize it, but that doesn't mean you're in that state. That's not the experience of it, right? And so what ends up happening in people's lives is this is largely a result of what I would call forces of diminishment, of which deceit is the main one, where the individual is ceasing to be authentic. It may be self-diminishment. It may be telling lies here and there to make things easier. It's almost always done for expedience, and it's all about the mask, typically, about the appearance, typically, and it's almost always in lots of small things. People tend to think of the big stuff, but large dysfunction in life is founded on lots of grains of sand of small dysfunction. It turns into a mountain, and people tend to only see it when the boulder hits them. Right. But really, it's all this little grains of sand underneath that's been building up over the years that warp consciousness. It warps conscience as well, warps the sense of self, and it creates sort of these inner demons that ultimately run the show. We sort of become puppets to these inner demons and lose track of our deepest inner essence. It gets covered over.
So Inspirience is your tome on meditation, your methodology to kind of work through those demons.
It's a way of using meditation to identify the places where we've falsely invested our energy in diminishment, in deceit, and a lot of it is self-deceit.
Right.
We're not necessarily trying to lie to other people. Oftentimes it's self-deceit.
Right.
And then how to use meditation and the feelings in the body, awareness of feelings in the body, to identify those places of imbalance, of disharmony, and release them, unbind them. And so that one ends up, after removing enough of this shell or fog that's sort of around the individual, that's the false self, to find this deep inner core essential point, what I call the nexus point. It's like the circle between infinite circles, and right in the middle of all the circles of being. And it's a beautiful place to be. And in that place, deceit has no power.
So also in your book Inspirience, you mentioned a term or a concept called isness.
Yes. This is the most difficult thing in the world to explain.
Right.
But it is the essence of all that is. Fundamental, non-formed essence of all that is, that the foundation that makes up all form, ultimately. The easiest place to discover it, and the most balanced place to discover it, is within. It's actually everywhere. But when we discover it within us, that's a great unbinding force then in our lives that spills over into the people around us and the places around us as well. It's a passive force, isness is, until the individual consciousness becomes aware of it. It's almost like looking in the mirror. Once it sees itself, it just activates. And it's an incredible power to transform the individual.
I hope I'm not misinterpreting the term, but it kind of reminds me of a quote. There's a famous meditation teacher. Her name is Sharon Salzberg. Have you ever heard of her?
I've seen a couple of her titles. I've never read her book.
Yeah. So she has this quote, and I'm probably not going to exactly quote it, but meditation shows you how things actually are. Meditation shows you the truth, and this sounds a little bit similar to your description of kind of the discovery of isness.
There's something to that, and I like the wording of that, and the reason that wording is very practical, from what I've heard anyway, is if we simply look at this ego-driven perspective of the world, and a lot of the anticipation, a lot of the anxiety and mental narratives and dramas, they're all in a lot of ways, we don't think of it the word I'm going to give for it, we don't think of it this way because we've normalized it. But they are hallucinations. They are in a lot of ways hallucinations, and we're hallucinating all the time, projecting or painting opinions on the world and past traumas and fears and just pushing all this out there, and that becomes the filter through which we see the world. But meditation actually is a way of sort of pulling away from that for a little bit, so where the hooks of that energy is no longer dug in, and when we pull away from it, we can start to see it in a non-personal way and realize, wait a minute, that's not ultimately true.
It's like the great Mark Twain quote that I tend to recite often. Most of the worst things in our lives have never actually happened to us.
I love that. Yeah.
And again, it goes back to what Sharon Salzberg said. Meditation shows us the truth. Because really, we tend to drive ourselves down these rabbit holes of BS and telling ourselves stories that aren't true, and things that we think we need to do to keep up with the Joneses, or worrying about yesterday, or whatever the case may be. But it's a tremendous.
It creates an atmosphere around the individual that just it's very toxic, and it bleeds off other people because we're constantly interacting, communicating verbally and in mostly nonverbal ways. And people are constantly watching and taking cues. And a lot of this, the learning is going on unconsciously by association. So if we're able to get into that, that isness place, or what I call inspirience, to experience this inner place of purity, then that creates a different atmosphere that other people are now consciously cueing into and picking up on. That's right. Creating little doors in people that they would not otherwise have.
It's a presence almost. It's a sense of presence that people can pick up on, a sense of authenticity that people can pick up on. There's no doubt, since I started meditating, a lot of people have told me they see a drastic change in me. I've had people tell me they just feel good when we have lunch together, which it's nice, but
refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it sounds a little corny, but these people never would have said that to me.
That's right.
In previous life. It's hard to explain, but
no, I think if you view it, it's a very strange perspective, but the way I sort of view things now is there's one soul that is throughout all that is. We call that isness. It's one. It's often described as the observing aspect. In meditation, there's this place where it's just like this pure observation. And it's not differentiated between you and me and John and Jill and the dog and the cat or the bug. It's throughout all that is. Which means if I were to pop into your body, it would be the same energy, the same observing thing, aspect, right?
Yeah.
And so what's happening is the observing aspect in them is feeling something authentic coming from you. And their body is responding to that. It feels good. It's refreshing. It's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And so those words are authentic to whoever they're given to.
Yeah, I think what it is, people feel that you are actually present for them when you are in their presence.
Yes, that's right.
Again, might sound a little corny, but what happens when you start to have a meditation practice.
And my hope is that corniness becomes the norm.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
No doubt. So can you tell us a little bit about your meditation practice? What does your practice entail?
So my practice of meditation was born very organically. I did not have a meditation teacher. And I'd had, as a young child, as I said, several visions and other very deep experiences that I wanted, sort of accidental meditations and such, that I really wanted to understand. I wanted to be able to get back there consistently. And so then, of course, I started actually trying to meditate. I had a girlfriend who had meditated, and I just sort of happened upon her while she was meditating, and I asked her what she was doing. And she said, I'm meditating. She taught me this basic technique, which is the first thing I talk about in Inspirience. And then I ended up using it one night after a bad argument with my mother. And I'm so angry. I'm hiking up in the hill behind my house, and I get to this. I just sit down in front of this tree and get to this incredibly deep place of silence. It was so beautiful, and that became that experience became my understanding of what the word meditation must mean, because I felt connected to all of the nature around me, but there was no sense of me. There was a body and there was nature, and all of that was interconnected. There wasn't a delineation between the body and nature and the energy flowing between the body and nature. And it was a beautiful experience. And all of that confusion and racing mind, negative energy just evaporated. And it was just gone. And it was amazing. And so that, to me, that was, okay, I found the essence of meditation. So then I thought, I can do this anytime. And what I found out is it isn't so easy. Getting back there isn't so easy.
Right. Well,
and I think that's where a lot of people have trouble.
Yeah, I think that there really should never be a goal when you sit down and meditate.
That's right. That's right. No expectation, because that'll kill you.
This isness that you talk about, I think it's also maybe a sense of bliss that you're referring to. And, to sit down and in search of that is not, I think, is an incorrect way of going about the practice. So to your point.
That's ultimately that was what the barrier was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the good thing about it is that there was a barrier, and so then that made me actually have to see if I could find ways of kind of getting. I didn't know what the barrier was. I just knew I couldn't get there again.
Right. Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah. I mean, the idea should be to just sit and let whatever comes up come up, acknowledge it, bring awareness to whatever's coming up, so then you can kind of move through it. And as all these thoughts and feelings and emotions continually arise and come up and pass, eventually you can get to a point where you have a sense of calm, because that flow of information is finally
not constipated anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you're not ruminating about it anymore. You get to a point where it's like, all right, there's that thought, label it, go to your breath or your anchor and move on.
So ultimately my path became about awareness, which is what you're talking about. And it ultimately became about simplification, removing as much form as possible. And so that it could be applied to my martial art. So that awareness, that connective feeling is just always there, no matter what is actually happening physically throughout the day. So that meditation ultimately isn't just a sit-down activity.
Right. And
so there is sit-down activity where you want to go really, really deep, but then there's also the other that is just like interlaced throughout the day.
Right. Yeah. I call that the informal practice, where you learn how to incorporate mindfulness or this awareness into everything you do. And just so people get a sense of a little bit more about you, Richard, I want the viewers to really understand that you spent 15 years living in Japan, studying a number of different martial arts. So, and actually, I think becoming a master level in what specific martial arts is it?
So I studied sword, which is Yagyu Shinkagiru. It's the most famous old system of traditional Japanese swordsmanship. So like you watch old samurai stories, this is like the system that the shogun trained in. That kind of thing. And it's a system that it's a rather exclusive sort of. It's not easy to learn or progress in the art. You have to really work your way through it. And it's a lot of intricacy, and it's very, very subtle. So very few people that really make it to high levels. And so I was very fortunate to have an instructor that welcomed me, because not everybody's welcomed into that sort of training.
I would imagine also it's a completely different culture. So those barriers, and you probably have to prove to him your sincerity type of thing, I would imagine.
Yes. In fact, I started with him practicing what's called Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. It's an old form of Jiu-Jitsu, a samurai art of Jiu-Jitsu, bodyguarding type art, very, very subtle. And after working with that instructor for a number of years, one day he said, you ought to practice sword. And I wasn't all that interested in sword at the time. And he said, I think you'd be good at it. And so I really respected him. So I just started, and then that became, there's a sword quick drawing, and then there's like the way you would fight on a battlefield with a sword. Then there's, like fencing with a sword, Japanese style fencing with a sword. And then there's short staff. And so the whole range of martial training that goes into it. But I ended up getting 4 master's licenses in samurai arts, which is, I was so thankful that my instructor didn't hold my nationality or race or any of that. He just saw me as a human being that was going to follow through.
Right. And I bring this up because here we are, we're kind of talking about meditation and so forth. And I just would imagine that the Japanese martial arts are, I would imagine that going through your motions can be very meditative and You can't be thinking about the past, or you have to be in the moment and
dynamically present.
Right, exactly.
And not aware in the way that most people are habitually aware, which is one line awareness, focal awareness, but instead aware in a 360 spherical awareness, right? A spherical. Right. On a battlefield, there's people all around you. You don't know who's your friend or your enemy.
Right.
And if you're focused on just cutting this guy in front of you, you just took a sword to the back.
Yeah.
So it turns into a natural meditation. It's just,
you
have to be aware around you.
The ultimate level of awareness.
And then in my case, so I thought, well, that's very interesting, because I can also take that same awareness of the external and then diminish the barrier between the internal and the external. That not everybody goes that way, goes in that direction,
right?
Because they may just be interested in combative skill. But when you start to do that, you gain a really deep inner awareness of what's happening in the body and why these narratives occur, where they're occurring in the body, because they're occurring in locations. It's the stuff happening in the nervous system that bubbles up in what I call kind of precursor thoughts and emotions. They're unformed blips that then memory strings together to create a narrative. And this is just automatically happening. It's a brain and nervous system pattern that comes from disharmony. And unless one starts to see that stuff, which is what mindfulness helps to do, any type of these, what we're talking about, these meditations, especially if we're intending to observe it, it starts to actually kind of unravel all of that to where we start to see through the self. It becomes sort of transparent, less personal. More of a tool than us.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Richard, let's move on to quite a bit of a different subject, which is your most recent book, which came out 2 days ago. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
It's the Psychedelic Leap, and I was going to hold it up on my iPad.
So you could see
Great.
it. Oh, does it show up on the screen? I don't know.
Yeah, it's there definitely. It's the Psychedelic Leap, and Richard talks about his experiences with psychedelics, and it almost sounds, counterintuitive to hear that Richard, who's somebody who is the master in, these Japanese martial arts and meditates, has kind of delved into this world of psychedelics. And I have to tell you that the book, I didn't finish it yet. Again, it just came out a couple of days ago, but I'm pretty far into it. And in the beginning, he really describes in detail, some of his experiences. One time when he went on a mushroom tea trip, and I think that the tea he made was a little bit too potent, and he describes in detail being on the bathroom floor in a lot of discomfort, with his stomach not feeling well, his head not feeling well. He didn't tell his wife what he had done, and then he had to call out to his wife for help. And at one moment, he literally says, "Oh, and honey, I may have taken some psychedelic mushrooms," as he's on the floor, naked, worried that he's going to vomit and, frankly, do other things to himself there. So, entertaining book. I would highly recommend it. But so, Richard,
a lot of comments about
I was really
getting laughs out of those chapters.
I was laughing out loud. It was, thank you for being so intimate with the details and sharing that. And maybe don't make such a potent tea for those that are thinking of going down this road. In any event, let's just talk about how that journey into the whole psychedelics started. I think it was kind of years ago. You took a trip to the Amazon and did a ayahuasca ceremony. And I just want to touch quickly on something here that, the research on psychedelics, I think, is ramping up a little bit more and more these days. There's more talk. I've seen research on psychedelics helping people with severe anxiety and depression. I am not a doctor, and I am certainly not condoning anybody trying psychedelics if, they're depressed or anxious. So But, you know, on the Don't Panic project here, my aim is to explore through conversation a lot of different options for people that are suffering in certain ways. So that being said, so tell us about your kind of journey into the psychedelics and this first trip to the Amazon.
Yeah, well, I would have to describe myself as a purist. It's a completely different chemical and whatnot, but when I was young, I drank and I smoked a lot of marijuana, and certainly all motivated by inner demons. I know that marijuana can have very beneficial medicinal purposeful use and so on and so forth.
Right.
And a lot of the effects that people will get off of any psychoactive substance comes down to motivations and intentions and the state of our inner space, for lack of a better term. But my experiences ultimately led to a suicidal state. Now, it wasn't just marijuana, obviously, that it didn't help.
Right.
I had a negative association with alcohol and any sort of drug for that matter. And so I become a purist, and I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't do anything for years. And I'd been in Japan training. I was already training the sword with my instructor. I was already fairly advanced along the way in these traditional arts. And, you know, reputation is important. So me writing this book is not necessarily good for my reputation.
Right. That's where the grand irony, I think, of all this is, no doubt.
I don't care. I just want to be authentic.
Yeah,
my goal is to be authentic. If I sold out for an image, to paint some image that's not true,
right,
off the path, it means nothing. So,
right. And Richard teaches and has students, and you know, this is his life now. Teach martial arts and meditation and all these things. So, you know, for him to talk about this, something that's maybe a little unorthodox, you know, he is really being authentic. So yeah, please carry on.
It's definitely a taboo topic.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. That's
so in 2005, I went to, I went on a vision quest. So I spent a month out in the forest. And
you spent a month in the forest?
Yeah.
What forest?
This is in the Pine Barrens in the East Coast.
Okay.
There's a survival course that goes on there.
Oh, right. Sure. I've heard of those.
Yeah. And so I was living there taking courses, and then between the courses, I just sort of spend a simple, you know, primitive life. And then there was a vision quest that went on there. It was 100 people spread out over this forest. You were far enough away you would never see or hear anybody else, but I joined that vision quest. And that 4 days was very, very enlightening. And when I got out of that vision quest, of course, it was like so many things. I made a list of, like, I think it was 30 questions concerning issues that I wanted answered through the vision quest. And about a couple hours into the vision quest, oh geez, at least 20 out of the 30 were scratched off the list. Not because I got the answer to them, but because I realized they meant nothing. The priorities were completely screwed. What I considered important was just not important.
Well, that's a pretty good realization right there. I mean,
yeah, it cut out so much complication in my life. As you said, the worst things that happen to us are things that never happened to us.
Right.
It's very much like that. So we've got all this mental noise going on. These things that we're prioritizing and valuing that actually our soul doesn't care about. Very few of the things that are not everybody, but for most people, we just took the average. But certainly where I was at that point, very little of what I considered to be important really was. It was just completely screwed up priorities. And by the end of it, I had answers to everything on my list. I left that vision quest. I spent a couple more weeks in the forest, and then I got on a plane, flew back to Japan. In the airport, I had this, I'm not sure if the audience will understand this terminology I'm going to use, so I'll explain a little bit. I had what I would describe as a pull. And what I mean by a pull is, it's this feeling that just the body itself is moved to do something. It doesn't come from desire. And whenever this pull happens, it's bringing you to some sort of deeper spiritual awareness, something for your life or your path that is valuable both for you and the world. And so it has nothing to do with desire. And oftentimes it's a pull to do something you do not want to do. Most times I find it to be stuff I didn't want to do, but stuff that I deep down knew I needed to do when I really questioned into it. Well, it pulled me into this bookstore, and I got this book on, what's the title? It was about this Amazonian tribe, these headhunters.
Right.
And I can't remember the name of the book right now. But in it described the ayahuasca ceremony, which is a core spiritual training tool that they use. So they make this substance called ayahuasca, or they actually call it natine, and it's a combination of a certain vine, which is called the ayahuasca vine. It itself has harmaline and other type of MAO inhibitor. It also has its own psychedelic qualities to it, but they combine that with another leaf that has a lot of DMT and dimethyltryptamine, which is highly potent, and they mix into this brew that is just super powerful psychedelic that lasts for, it takes about, I don't know, maybe between, say, 40 minutes to an hour to kick in, and then it might be active. You might be peak state for an hour, possibly 2 hours, and you come back down and it kind of trickles off. And so it talked about this this experience. I wasn't interested in the experience. I didn't like psychedelics. Why am I reading this book?
I'm interested in, I think there's a real curiosity in this type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I had an ideology against, I thought all drugs were just
No, I mean, listen, you're certainly somebody, I would say you're a spiritual warrior. What does that mean? That, you're constantly exploring your spirituality and looking to go deeper and to these places in the mind. And, I think the concept with the whole psychedelic thing is that it kind of opens up unknown doors and so forth, and ideas, right, and pathways, and at least that's the perception for me.
Yeah. Well, what ended up happening is I knew I needed to go to be with some tribal people that are living close to the land. I wasn't actually, when I was reading it, I wasn't thinking I want to do ayahuasca or anything like that. That was just a part of the book. It wasn't even the main part of the book. It was just right. Like they also do this and they do that. It was just describing their culture.
Right. The ayahuasca is just a part of what they do.
Yeah, like tea is for Japanese people in China, in Japanese right. people in their lifestyle. It's just a part of their, going to church for them or something. But I knew I needed to go to to some, the rainforest and spend some time with the people. And there was something I was going to learn from the people by doing that. I felt it viscerally. And so I started kind of searching for trips that would, I'd maybe go to, Southeast Asia. There's various tribes in different countries that you could possibly go. And ultimately I was drawn to the Amazon. 4 years later I went. And then while we were there as a sort of a ecotourism program, I believe there were 13 of us in the group that we were staying with these Achuar people. They'd set up this ecotour area with huts, and we would stay there, and then we would go out in the day. They'd take us around through the forest and teach us things, and just the tribes people. And one night, a neighboring shaman, by neighboring I mean like a 3 or 4 hour hike through the forest.
right. Through the Amazon,
Yeah, it might have been longer than that. I don't remember how long the hike was. It was a pretty good hike. Had invited us to join in a ayahuasca ceremony. And so he said, come at this time and we'll do this. And so everybody was interested in at least going. And some people wanted to take it, and I was still kind of on the fence about it. But I couldn't deny that there was this inner voice saying, you need to do it. Part of me was, not liking the idea, again, that purist ideology, but as soon as I committed to doing it, that was just evaporated, really. Yeah. And so it was profound. And it was as if, the way I see it now, the mind is creating, at least the mind created what I experience in there. It was almost like you've taken off, you've removed the distributor from your brain, and your brain is this very complicated thing that is parts have evolved over millennia, many different perspectives.
Sure.
It's not just one person in there. I mean, there's all levels of evolution in the brain, and they're all active now. It's just that there's the frontal lobe and some other aspects of the brain that create the egoic sense that pretty much pushes all that down, and only a little bit gets through. And so there's a lot of voices in there and potential wisdom and knowledge that just isn't coming through, because all these little perspective windows in the brain that the curtains have been shut by the ego. And what the ayahuasca does is it's like it takes the distributor cap off, and all these different possibilities, these different windows suddenly open up, and some of those may speak, you know.
It's a great description.
Yeah, and it was really, it gave me a direction in life that incidentally went back to the childhood vision that I had when I was 8, and a number of other I don't know why, but some people just naturally have visions throughout their lives, and they're not all that different from a psychedelic vision. Really not all that different. Aside from you don't have a stomach ache or whatever the negatives that go along with it, but again, some deeper place is communicating, and it's clear. And so the ayahuasca ceremony had kind of tied back to that original vision, and then pointed out how I can take the therapy art that I was already an instructor of in Japan, and the meditation that I had already found, and the martial art training that we've done, and kind of combine all of this to find a common core principle of awareness that affected all of these areas and daily life, and ultimately led the individual to freedom from the self, the oppressive self, right? What I call being a transparent self.
Right.
And so once that vision was over, I went back to Japan, and I'm going to tell my traditional martial arts instructor, I had to tell him this. I mean, it was like viscerally clear I had to tell him. And that was terrifying.
Yeah.
Because the guy could have just said, get out of my dojo.
Yeah.
Quack. I mean,
yeah.
It would have been very easy. A lot of instructors might simply do that. But I told him anyway. And he said, okay, let's do it. I'll teach you the martial art. We'll get together privately. You teach me the therapy art. I'll teach you the martial art. You teach me what you know of meditation, and we'll just see how they can fit together. Can we make this into one thing? And so we just started spending a lot of private time together. I was so blessed, I mean, to have this. And basically, I mentored him in the best way I could mentor him in the healing arts, and he mentored me in the best way he could in all of his arts. And the result was just amazing. Yeah, and it sped up my progress in everything just tenfold. I mean, it was just like, boom.
Right. So amazing. So Richard, we're getting a little short on time. So I just want to say, Inspirience, great book about, learning how to meditate and taking that deeper dive also. And, the Psychedelic Leap, which really interesting book, and everybody should take a read on that to really understand Richard's deeper dive into psychedelics. Anything else you want to say about the Psychedelic Leap?
Yes, I think the most important thing is it's not written to promote psychedelics.
Right.
It's actually written as an honest exploration into psychedelics from someone who's highly disciplined in other areas of awakening.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Setting aside the bias, what is it? How could it be? Could it be a benefit? How could it be a benefit? And if it is, in what way the reader could get the most benefit out of it? And incidentally, what I discover, the perspective that's discovered that does get a tremendous benefit out of psychedelics, has just as powerful a benefit in your daily life if you never use psychedelics. It's tremendously powerful. And so in fact, if you just go and read the reviews, that's what my initial reviewers are, people that do meditation. They're not interested because that's what I've been writing on.
Right.
They're not interested in psychedelics, but they're reading it just because, well, I wrote a book on psychedelics. They like my work. And the comments are, I've never done psychedelics, but this book helped. And so that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And listen, I think it's an important topic. Again, it is something that you're seeing more research about, and it's interesting. And, you know.
Yeah, I think we're just like, we know almost nothing about psychedelics. We also almost know nothing about consciousness. So the research into this is going to be, I think, going to be the next step in our awareness of what consciousness is, or at least how we can understand the human being a little bit deeper. Yeah,
I've seen a couple of documentaries on these ayahuasca ceremonies, and you know, some people come out of them with these, you know, profound feelings of change, and you know, their depression is gone, and I don't know how long it lasts, and you know, again, not condoning anything like you said.
In fact, I actually warn there's certain types of people that probably ought not be doing psychedelics.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
If you don't have a draw to do it, there's
certain types of people that shouldn't be drinking coffee, you know.
That's right. Yeah, and if you don't have a draw to do it, then why would you?
Right.
So, again, it's just being authentic, right?
Absolutely. So, and you're a very authentic person. There's no doubt about it. You know, since I've gotten to know you. So again, Richard Haight, that's Haight. The Psychedelic Leap is his most recent book. Inspirience, Meditation Unbound, The Unconditional Path to Spiritual Awakening. He's also written a book called The Unbound Soul a few years ago, which I read as well. Are those the only three, or do you have?
Those are the three. There's another one coming out here in the next few months that it's about autonomy. So you may have actually had this experience. I don't know. Have you ever had an experience in your meditation where your body moves on its own?
I'm not sure what you're describing, where you kind of.
Like I talk about this, I talk about it in Inspirience, where a person threw a softball at the back of my head and my body just moved on its own.
And you ended up.
I ended up catching it.
Yeah, I can't say I've had that experience.
Yeah. Now, of course, these things are happening. Autonomic nervous system is a nervous system in the peripheral nervous system in the human body, and it controls a lot of of unconscious movement.
Right.
And so there's a way of tapping into this autonomic nervous system with an intentful way to, very similar to psychedelics or very similar to meditation, to actually see one's inner disharmony and release it through the autonomic nervous system. And the reason it's done through the autonomic nervous system and not is because when we're thinking and when we're focusing too much, there's a sort of an oppressive force that doesn't allow the body to release it naturally. Whereas when we use the autonomic system, it's almost like yawning. Yawning is a way of releasing stress, and it's autonomic. You're not controlling your yawn.
Right.
Right. And so when what's happening is the body ends up moving in ways that you don't expect. It almost seems like you're possessed or something. It's weird.
This is your next book is on the.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's really powerful.
Really come up with some really interesting topics. So
it's really, well, I discovered this through the martial arts. It's a long, I mean, all the things I've done have led to this understanding, but the body will start to move on its own in the martial arts. When you get to high levels where you don't even know. After it's done, you can look back and go, oh, that's what happened.
Well, I think it's something that we referred to in the beginning of the conversation, you know, the flow state, or so getting into the zone, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, and that space is happening at a so much faster pace than the mind could ever keep up with.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
Like with swords, if you're thinking, you're dead.
Right. Yeah. So Richard, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find out what you're doing? What's your website?
So if they're interested in coming to my website, I've got a complimentary audio course. It's a 13-part series, and it goes into how to take spiritual authority in your daily life. And that's available at www.richardhaight.net. And all of my books will be available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that sort of online retailers and such.
Awesome. So thanks so much for your time. To my viewers, thank you so much for your time, for joining us again on another edition of the Don't Panic Project, where we provide conversations to help empower, inspire, and educate people suffering from stress, anxiety, and depression. You can see more conversations at www.don'tpanicproject.com. So we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Thank you, Jim.